a surgeon came in. He told us that we should leave Sarah, leave our baby in the hospital, and to walk away from her, not to bond with her, don't feed her, just leave her, walk away, and have other children. And to hear that kind of advice from a doctor, from a surgeon, we were in a total daze and shock that our child wouldn't live. I believe my great-grandfather was the first Jewish ostrich farmer in South Africa. My grandfather always wore this special hat. He would also put on the tefillin, the phylacteries around his arm and around his head. He would take me to the synagogue on Shabbat. As a young boy, it's coming up to my bar mitzvah. The rabbi made a speech, and he got up and he said, well, it's a shame that Lawrence is not as good at Hebrew as he is at rugby. So I was the sportsman in the family. My brother Alan, on the other hand, was more of the philosopher, the thinker. When my brother came home from an army pass on the weekend, he had this Bible and some literature, and my brother and I shared a bedroom together. So he hid that literature under his bed. I'm not really sure how this happened, but my parents found that Bible. And I was really quite shocked to see their response to my brother's interest. And I'd never seen my dad cry before, but I saw him cry. My brother put it aside and vowed not to think about Jesus again. I met Louise when I was 15 and she was 14, even at a young age, talking about one day when we got married. And she had agreed that if we ever did get married, that she would convert and become Jewish. It was at that time that Jews in South Africa were wondering about the future. And a lot of Jews decided to go to Australia. I had to consider leaving behind my beautiful girlfriend. And that was extremely traumatic. So I had a little deal with God. God, if you'd bring us back together, if we could see each other again, I would become a good Jew, and that will bring up our children to be good Jews. And in that year, things really began to change. My brother, once we had come to Australia, started to think about Jesus once again. He became a very strong believer in Jesus. He had a supernatural encounter with God. His life was completely changed. He was saying things like, I really love Jesus. Jesus has changed my life. And I thought that was very odd. First of all, because Jesus was a man and he lived 2,000 years ago, and I couldn't understand this love that they shared for one another. Not only that, of course, Jesus was dead, so how could he love Jesus? And it really didn't make any sense to me. And he just said, listen, Lawrence, I want to read to you. He started to read about this man who had been rejected by his people, who had come to suffer and die for the sins of others, not his own. And after he had read the scripture to me, I said to him, well, that's obviously all about Jesus, and that must be in the New Testament. Well, of course, he was very quick to show me that he had just read from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 53, the prophet who wrote 700 years before Jesus. I was really struck with that prophecy. It was a prophecy that really made me think that there is some truth to what my brother was sharing with me. That made me feel very uncomfortable. I always felt a very strong connection with my Jewish identity, and here I was being confronted with the truth about Jesus being the Messiah. I started to think to myself, really, Jesus could be our Mashiach, our Jewish Messiah. And if he is, well then, I had to, as a Jew, believe in him. And so I came to a point when the opinion of God became more important to me than the opinion of my people. That was very difficult because I was worried about what would my mom and dad think? What would my family think if I went the same way as my brother? But that night, I prayed to accept Yeshua as my Mashiach. That was the day that my life completely changed. I phoned Louise. She's back in South Africa, and I shared with her, I said, look, Louise, I've got something to tell you, that I pray to accept Jesus as my Messiah. And I was totally shocked at her response. She said, so have I. Louise and I never talked about it, so we didn't really know what was going on behind the scenes. And in that first year, as I was coming closer and considering faith in Yeshua as the Messiah, So Louise was back in South Africa. And we were totally amazed how God kind of entered into our lives, revealed the Messiah to us at the very same time. 7 months later, we got married under a chuppah. In South Africa, Louise became pregnant, and she had a very normal pregnancy. And eventually, Sarah was born. But when Sarah was born, she didn't cry. The doctor had come in to speak to us. And he told us that Sarah was born with no brain. And he said, well, we don't think Sarah will live. She'll probably only live 2 or 3 days, which of course, those words went right over our heads, and we were totally shocked at what we were hearing. And we knew in our hearts, though, that we couldn't just walk away from Sarah. And so we took her home the very next day. And Sarah was very unwell. Louise, as a beautiful mother, was just praying that God, let Sarah live. Let there be a miracle. Let Sarah be healed. I was angry with God in the first couple of years. I had to try and understand, where was God? I knew that Sarah was going to live. And I can't tell you for sure that I was happy about that at first. To my shame, I was really asking God to take her. I didn't really want to go through a difficult time. And God began to use Sarah in a most amazing way in our lives. The doctor had said that Sarah would be a vegetable, that she wouldn't smile. And the first time she smiled at me. And she really melted my heart. And I really had felt like perhaps, like a murderer, that I wanted her to die. I didn't want her to live. And I really repented of that, because I knew God had a special purpose for Sarah's life, to do something deep within me, to do something in us as a family. Sarah today is 27 years old, and yet Sarah's life has spoken so much to us and to others, even though she herself has never spoken a word. I came to realize, though, that God works through difficult times in our lives in very powerful ways, that He actually speaks to us louder through our suffering than He does through our pleasures. And Sarah's disability has taught us so much about God. It's taught us so much about life. Life is not perfect. There's a lot of challenges. I think there's one thing that is common to all humanity, and that is suffering. And He uses all these things in our lives to speak to us in very profound ways. And that makes God very impressive, the way that He can actually use difficult life circumstances to teach us and to mold us and to make us into, God willing, better human beings.